Hello, I'm Pastor Keith Mozingo of Metropolitan Community Church of Baton Rouge. I want to thank you for clicking on the video of our worship message. Please go to our Facebook page at facebook.com/MCCBR to see the entire worship service, including prayers, special music, and communion. You're also welcome to join us every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for worship service. Stay tuned after the message for information on how you can stay in touch with us.
I know it seems like trouble comes when you...
I thought Christmas month is always the busiest for ministers, and then Easter, and for us MCC Pride Month. But I'm going to tell you, it's a whirlwind around here this month. But February, today especially, is for some of you getting home after we eat so you can see the halftime show. That is a concert and commercials, and I hear there's a ball game going on. Black History Month, Mardi Gras Month, Ash Wednesday, which is on Valentine's Day. Yes, we are still having church service. Maybe we'll have red ashes. I know we had glitter ashes last week. Maybe we'll do red glitter, and you can either choose a cross or a heart. Next Sunday, we're doing the blessing of relationships because it's close to Valentine's Day. Next Sunday, we're celebrating the trans community because it's in the church calendar, Transformation Sunday, and we want to honor. See, trans started with Jesus. Hello. Maybe before then. And then we start the Lenten season, so we'll be in Lent. And we're planning a 24-hour prayer vigil. So there's just all sorts of stuff going on during this month. And instead of just being ready to pull my 3 hairs out, I've been like so excited. It's like, oh my God, where do we start? Where do you dig in? So as I was in the whirlwind of trying to figure out, because I was trying to decide between 2 readings for today, and I kept coming back to this story of Eli and Samuel, and it was really because Brother Scott Pitzer sent me a message this week on Facebook, a little video. Some of you may have gotten it too. And it's where this guy is hearing other people and hearing at church the children's leader talking about God speaking to people. And he's like, well, God's never spoken to me. I've never heard God's voice. And what's wrong with me? Is there something wrong with me? Does God not love me? And he starts all this self-examination. He's like, well, God, if you can speak to all these other people, I wish you'd speak to me. And he had pretty much no longer gotten that prayer out of his mouth that he's driving home. And he feels this tug to stop by a convenience store and buy milk. And he's like, he didn't hear an audible voice. He just kind of was like, has this urge to get milk. So he's like, well, we got milk. It was like, well, it's milk. Who cares? Why do I feel like I need milk all of a sudden? So he goes in and he gets milk. And then he's driving home. And as he's going by a particular street, he feels an urgency to turn down that street, but it's not his way home. And so he questions it, and he was like, oh, this is silly. I'm going on by. So he goes on by, but the urgency gets worse inside of him to go back to that street for some reason. So he, goes around the block, and he gets on that particular street. And then as he's going down that street, he gets the urgency to stop in front of a particular house. House he's not familiar with, people he doesn't know. But he stops, and then he has this argument with himself. Okay, those of you who are trained listeners to God's voice and know that God speaks to us in many ways, let me ask you something. You ever just sit there after you know good and well, hear what I just said, you know good and well that this is out of the ordinary and that God has spoken to you. But you still sit there and argue thinking this is silly, trying to talk yourself out of what God's saying. Amen. And trying to talk yourself out of the blessing that you're about to receive because you are questioning whether this is God or not. I'm not saying it's wrong to question it. I think you should be sure, because I've had some times that I was like, I don't really understand what I just heard. And I've had people come up and say, the Lord told me to tell you, and I was like, I don't think so. Let me just say this. If it's really God, it will connect.
Yes.
Do you hear me? It will connect some way, and you will discern whether it's really God or not.
Yes.
But if it's buying a gallon of milk, hello, it's not going to hurt much, right? Even if you're wrong. And if you're going down a certain street, now it could hurt you if you go to the wrong door, I suppose. Make sure it's God. And he did. He sat there and wrestled with it in his car. He noticed that the lights were off, and he was like, well, nobody's home, or either they're in the bed, and what's it going to look like for a complete stranger to come up and hand them a gallon of milk? But he could not shake off this urgency. So finally he goes up to the door, knocks on the door, and this kind of gruff man comes to the door and says, yes, may I help you? And he's like, here, this is for you. And he starts to turn, but as he does, the man grabs the milk and goes running down the hallway of the house. And so he stands there waiting and listening, and in a minute, the man and his wife and his little baby come walking back up, and he said, we've paid our bills, but we're out of money, and our baby has run out of milk. And we didn't know what we were going to do. We turned everywhere we knew. Now that's pretty dramatic, isn't it?
Amen.
To know that God has used you in such a way, and that you listened. Now, number one, if he hadn't have done it, he'd have never known that story. And we don't know the end of that story if it turns a different way. But as soon as I read that story, I was like, well, I guess we're back to Eli and Samuel, because God spoke. God kept speaking, even calling Samuel by name. Samuel, an 11-year-old child. You think God doesn't speak to these young people that were just on the stove? Oh, yes, God can speak to you. God was speaking to me when I was that age. And God speaks to them. And don't you ever discount when God speaks through and to our children.
Amen.
But you know, Samuel didn't just get that. There must have been something in his genes. Because his mama's name was Hannah. She was one of two wives of Elkanah. There was Hannah and Peninnah. Isn't that an interesting name? How would you like your name to be Peninnah? Well, Peninnah had children with Elkanah, but Hannah could not have children. And yet, Elkanah kind of favored his second wife, Hannah, more than he did Peninnah, which Peninnah didn't like because Peninnah was very jealous of Hannah. Hannah would go to the temple, and her heart would be so broken that she could not have a child. She wanted a child. And one day when she was at the temple, she was so distraught that she was crying and she was moving her lips as she was praying. And Eli, the prophet, the priest, was standing there and saw her and thought she was drunk. Now she was pretty distraught for him to think she was drunk, don't you think? She is standing there praying, and finally he catches her on the way out the door and says, "Ma'am, what is going on with you? Are you okay?" And she says, "I'm distraught because I cannot have a child." And the Spirit of the Lord came upon the priest Eli. And he began to prophesy over her and tell her, "You will have a child. You can count on it." And Hannah believed the word of the prophet. She believed the word of God that was spoken through the prophets. In fact, sometimes when you tell me something, are you sure about that? I'm sure it's Hannah. That's who I'm talking about. Hannah in the Bible. She was sure. She was absolutely sure that God would honor God's she would have a child. And sure enough, she and Elkanah got together on Valentine's Day. And she had a child named Samuel. And she said to the prophets, if God allows me to have this child, I will give this child back to God for God's 100% service. So when the child was very young, as was the custom of those days, she sent him back to the temple to be brought up with the others who had been dedicated for God's service, who were to become priests. And they would be trained from a young age to be priests to the people of God. That same Eli was the one in our reading today that had prophesied over Hannah. And now that same prophet has her son, who is now 11 years old, in the temple saying, I heard a voice. I heard a voice. And it's important that he heard the voice. And it's important that Eli heard him and responded. Now, obviously, Eli, being an older man, wanted his sleep. And first couple of times, he's like, Samuel, I didn't call you, you're just screaming, go back to bed. Samuel was just screaming, you're bothering me. We've got to get some sleep. We've got a busy day tomorrow. Go to bed. I heard one of the, I believe it was Claire. Who was it? Was it Claire? So I hear Mama saying, go to sleep from the other room, right? How many of us have heard that? Yeah. And now some of you that have children or grandchildren have said that. Yeah. Yes. See, it just keeps going. The circle of life keeps going. Amen. And so, here we have Eli. But Eli also knows Samuel, and he knows God. And something in Eli's spirit had to change on that third go-around. And he says, wait just a minute, because the Bible says he perceived, he felt something in his spirit. There's that assurance. There's that confirmation. God is doing something with this child, and I need to pay attention. And more than that, he needs to pay attention. And just so you know, after he sent him back the third time, I love the way that scripture ended the day. Samuel said, speak, Lord, your servant hears you. And then it said he listened. He listened to what God had to say. At 11 years old, he listened to what. There's just one thing. How many of you have heard this from your parents? You're not listening to me. How many times do I have to tell you this? Because we hear them. We tune them out, but we hear them. Sometimes we're not listening. And I've had my mama and my daddy a few times jerk me up and say, excuse me, I need for you to listen to me. Now, I don't have children, but even yesterday at the dog park, I had to walk over to Mr. Fairfax and say, get his collar. I didn't jerk him, but I did get his collar. And I kept talking to him until he looked at me. I was like, you have to look at me. Contact here. I need you to look. And I need you to listen to me. Saying it even to our fur babies. I practice what I preach. Listen, you gotta listen. You gotta listen. And overall, he did. Praise the Lord. Turned out very good. Has God spoken to you lately? And if so, are you listening? Not tuning God out. Are you listening? Some of you wanted to roll over this morning. And the Spirit said, get up and go to church. Amen. And you did. There's a few people lying on their bed right now, probably looking at us online. Hello. I spoke to you this morning, told you to get up and come to church. You did. through the 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds? Are you listening through the teachers and the preachers around you? Maybe. God sometimes speaks in the still small voice or in that deep urgency in our spirit.
Yep.
Sometimes, as Kelly mentioned while ago to the children, sometimes God speaks through those around you.
Yes.
I heard one husband say about his wife that God spoke to him through a voice most clear to him, his wife's. And God always spoke to him through his wife. God doesn't always say what we want to hear either.
Amen.
God sometimes says something to us that we have to go home and contemplate, and we have to go up on the mountaintop, or in our bathrooms, or driving down the road, or down at an altar to pray. You all have those special places that you have to go when you don't have time to go to New Mexico and climb a mountain. I do have places to go. One of those examples, and I thought it wonderful that Reverend Wayne Lindsay was going to be here today. When I decided in 1989 to join Metropolitan Community Church at St. John's MCC in Raleigh, North Carolina, and Wayne had become the pastor. And he held the membership class, my membership class. There were 18 of us in membership class that day. And he had a circle in a big circle. And I've told you this story before, but some of you are new with us, so you haven't heard it. So for those of you that have heard it, I hope it's worth hearing again. And there are people out there listening that haven't heard this at all. Reverend Wayne Lindsay had all of us sitting in a circle, and he had us do this exercise where he said, I want you to close your eyes for a few seconds and envision God. And I just so y'all know, I do that. Those of you that have joined this church while I've been here, I do that exercise. I've been doing it ever since, all through the years. That is an exercise that I got from this man. And, of course, I was a biblical scholar. I had come out of the Church of God, and those people know the Scriptures. You know your Bible front and back, and you can quote a lot of it. And so, when he asked us to open our eyes and to tell him what God looked like, I was the first to raise my hand because I knew the biblical explanation of what God looked like, and I was ready to be the first in the class to share the right answer. And he was very quiet and patient then, as he is now. Lord knows, he's nursed me through a lot more than you just don't know. You just don't know. And he said, Keith, and I said, well, God is an old white man with long white hair flowing, and he's sitting on a throne, and his eyes are flames of fire, ready to rule the universe. Oh, I was dramatic. And I was so excited in my piety. I had given the right answer for the class. I was expecting a gold star afterwards.
There you go.
And then he did something very unusual. Because, see, I was a school teacher myself. And I gave the answer, but he said, let's go around the room now and let everyone share what they saw. And I was like, why? I just gave you the answer. I don't know if I've ever told you the details. I've never told him this. I was like, why would he do that? I just gave him the answer. And so he goes to the woman right beside of me, and then we go all 18 times, around the room. And the woman beside of me is an African-American young lady. And he said, Wanda, what did you see? And Wanda said, I saw an old black woman with gray hair and her grandchildren around her neck.
Amen.
That's what I thought. Wow. What Bible is she reading? This was a long time ago, and thank God Pastor Keith has grown into something different.
Amen. Amen.
Because I literally thought, as soon as she said that, I thought, what kind of dumb answer is that? Does she not have a clue what the Bible says about this? And I'm sitting there kind of spellbound at her answer when he goes to the next person, and one person sees light. I think we actually did have one in 18 that saw that picture of Jesus, that white Jesus with blue eyes and light hair that a lot of our grandmothers had hanging in their houses. I think there may have been one person that saw Jesus. But I heard a lot of stuff that could have been in an art class. And I'm sitting there thinking, God, we have a lot of biblically illiterate people in this. Thank God I was here. I did think that. I'm trying to. I thought that. Lord, have mercy.
Amen.
And Wayne did not correct any of them.
Amen.
And I wondered what was wrong with him. Why is he not correcting these people? And then I thought, well, he's the pastor. He has to be gentle, and you have to lead people little by little, step by step, into all truth. Remember, I preached about that recently. Into all truth. Oh my goodness.
Hello, you know God's Stella Reese.
Della Reese. Della Reese to her.
Amen.
I've come a long way.
Amen.
We have come a long way.
Amen.
And our denomination has been teaching inclusivity and even learning from each other what that really is. Because even in a recent racism class, Kelly taught me some things. Rhonda taught me some things through her grandchildren.
Amen.
Some racist roots deep down in me. I have some black blood in me, just so you know. And I love it. And I love telling people that. My skin color doesn't give it away. But I love telling the story of my name and where it came from, and that it was an African slave woman and a white man that produced the first Mozingo, and that all Mozingos in the United States today came from 1620s in Virginia with a slave woman and a white European man. That was the first Mozingo. And Mozingos are all over Africa, by the way. Can't find that name much anywhere else. I'll claim that as my roots.
Amen.
This week, we posted about the Episcopal Church finally coming around and getting rid of gender for what they call God.
One
diocese. Sorry, not the whole church. One diocese. But that's a start. And we in MCC have been doing it for almost 50 years.
Amen.
Almost 50 years. Oh, it's been work. Don't get me wrong. There have been some people who left MCC because we wouldn't refer to God as He. And I heard all sorts of horrible stories. Well, you're not taking my Father away from me. Well, with that attitude, you don't have much of the Father either. Maybe. But maybe nobody's trying to take anything away from you, but to let you see that you can't contain God in anybody.
Come on. Amen.
That's what God showed me, that I kept putting the barriers, and God was bigger than any barrier I put out there.
Yes.
God was bigger than that, and sometimes I needed God to be the mother hen, with her wing over me, protecting me. Sometimes I needed God to be the rock, so that I could slide in the cleft. Sometimes I need for God to be all sorts of other things that went out of the parameters of what I was taught. And it didn't take me away from God. It brought me closer to
Amen.
God. Because now I can see that God is whatever I need God to be.
Amen.
And that God can speak in all sorts of ways.
Yes.
By the way, that was Reverend Wayne Lindsay that brought me through that and got me started. That was the first. That was the first. And by the way, that woman that was sitting beside me, that young African-American girl, I called her girl because she was young. She is the Reverend Wanda Floyd, who is now over emerging ministries in our denomination.
Amen.
And I spoke to her yesterday to say, Wanda, is it okay if I invoke your name? Wayne's going to be here. I'm going to invoke him. Can I invoke your name? And she's like, well, yeah, why? Of course you can. Go for it. And I'm like, I'm going to talk. And I did a Sophia Petrillo thing, for those of you who like Golden Girls. I typed out to her. We were texting back and forth. And I said, remember St. John's MCC 1989 membership class. Wayne Lindsay asked us, what does God look like? And Wanda said, an old black woman with gray hair, with her grandchildren around her knee. And I said, thank you. I went home and wrestled with that, and wrestled with it, and wondered why God had brought me to this place, and how it wasn't just that answer, it was 18 different answers. And God was all of that and more. And here we are today. Is God speaking to you? Are you listening? Are you really listening? Because if you're listening, you just might learn something.
Amen.
Amen.
Again, thank you for watching our worship message video on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get notified of other video posts. You can also watch our worship service in its entirety by going to facebook.com/MCCBR. You can watch us live on Facebook at 11 a.m. Central every Sunday. Visit our webpage at mccbr.org, where you can find our calendar of events, as well as other information about our church and our denomination. Like our Facebook page so you can be notified of our other live events. Thank you again, and may you have a blessed week.
Whether here and now or another time, not even height or depth, whether strong or weak, in the face of the future or the powers that be, you are not separated.